this video, we'll continue to create some secondary details in our dinosaur and prepare the mesh for our tertiary sculpt detail. So to begin, I'm going to look at this area on the neck, and in the same way that we created this area here, I'm going to create a second one on the back of the neck here. So I'm going to select these edges like so, and this time I'm going to hit the spacebar and choose bevel, and I'm going to make sure that this old variant here is checked, and I'm just going to expand this out and say OK. So that gives me extra geometry in there. I'll then go over to split rings, split those edges between the two triangles to form quads, and I'll go over to points and just start to manipulate these points a little bit more. So I'm using this as a way of just digging into the neck area, carving out a shape for what are perceived as muscles or tendons, etc. in the neck area of the dinosaur, which we kind of can see inside our reference down here. So we're just carving away into that mesh there to give that feeling of underlying structure to the neck. And I'm going to add a little bit more geometry in the neck area here just to even this up. You can come over here to slide edges and verts, go over to edges here, hold control, just move these down just to give me a little bit more space, and then I'm going to split a ring in the center here just to even that out a little bit more. Okay, and on the other side those didn't translate over, but that's okay because we have our symmetry button here that it's resymmetrized that over. So as we did last time, we're using our Shift and C on our keyboard to preview a Catmull-Clark subdivision and just see what that would look like at a subdivided level with those edits that we've just made, and undo to return to the low poly version. So that's fine on there. Let's continue. And we'll create one on the back of the leg. So over here we can see that we have this muscle here in the back leg. So I just want to emphasize that little bit of muscle in this back leg. And so I'll use the same technique. I'll go over to select, and I'll select some of these edges around here, spacebar and bevel. Say OK. Then I can use my split rings tool and just add a split there. And let's just move these points around now. Just to give a little bit more definition of muscle in this area here. Shift C, but that gives us a good starting point in where that muscle definition is on there. So let's undo. And one other area down here on the knee is where I could just add a little bit more detail down here, and we may be able to sculpt additional tertiary details over there. So let's change our tool to the add and split tool here, and so I'll start from this point and I'll just click around this set of geometry here and finish it there. Ring, and that split there, and let's massage those points. Again, it's just landmark placement, just so we've got this shape to begin sculpting with in the next stage. It just gives that little bit extra detail on that knee, and I think we could push that a little bit further as well. Let's go ahead and just bring this out a little bit more. And this is the beauty of working at a low subdivision level. I don't have as many points or verts to move around and massage into position. I can do a very easy change to the main geometry here and very quickly just preview that to give me an indication of what that's going to look like at a higher subdivision level. Okay, so we've got enough geometry in there, so let's undo back to the lower subdivision level, and let's move on to let's create a tongue in here as well. So let's do that. So I'm going to choose polygons for this one. Let's remove that one. That should be okay. And I will do transform. hold shift down just to move the gizmo and commit an extrusion and go one up on there, and that's all I need for that. I'm just going to go a little bit higher, and I'm going to use this rotate just to make the back part of the tongue appear thicker than the front part of the tongue, and I do that just by rotating those polys there. That done, I'm going to hit escape and Control D to deselect, and then back to the move tool, and let's just move these points around here. So at this point I'm just going to round this tongue out, and again it's very low poly. I can come into here and sculpt this and give it a little bit more detail, but for now this is just giving me a good idea of this tongue shape. So as we come to the end of the tongue, I'm flattening out this groove in the tongue there, and I need to flatten this out a little bit more at the end. So I could jump over to edges, grab this edge, move this over. Let's move these forwards a little bit. Go to points. And there we have the foundation work there for a tongue. So let's do our preview technique on there. It's not looking too bad. Undo. Let's raise this back part up a little bit higher. Again, preview and return to the low poly. So we can go ahead and keep customizing this as much as we like, but at the end of the day we just got to get that nice shape in there for the tongue so it reads well. Give it plenty of room. Maybe move these up a little bit more just so we can see it over the lips. So the last part of this section here is I'm going to just do a little bit of more work on this eye shape here. It's a little bit, it's not defined very well, and we can just push it a little bit more. And then I'm going to move over to polygons here, and we will select these polygons here, 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 just for the eye. Let's go to transform, local, and I would just want to extrude this one inwards like so, and then I'm going to just shrink that down, move it back a little bit. Let's do another extrusion, move that one in, and just reduce that size down as well, just to make that a little bit more of a defined eye cavity there. Drop that selection, just work this eye shape a little bit more. Something like that. Just take a quick look at our subdivision level. Let's go over to this menu here where it says simple check. Move down to where it says retopo wireframe and uncheck that so we can get a little bit better preview of our model. Bring back our retopo wireframe, and let's get back to that lower subdivision level. Let's select make sure edges is selected there, and just to give a little bit more of a crease, spacebar, bevel, increase that area there, say OK to that one, and I'll just use the add and split on this as we've only got two edges here to do that. So let's split and add that split in there. Over to the move tool with points selected. Just pulling this, just using that extra bit of geometry there, just to pull that in and define a little bit more of that. A little bit too much. So let's bring that back a little bit more. Define that edge to the arm where it joins with the body. Let's take a look at those changes. Yeah, that's a little bit better. It's only a small edit, but it just helps to define that front arm a little bit more. So with those edits complete, I can just check the spines and also the teeth. Now that tongue has been positioned, and we can see everything's fallen into position nicely, and we're ready to take this to the next level now, where we can start to do our tertiary detail pass within the sculpt workspace. So let's prepare the model for that. I'm going to turn off the spines and teeth for now. We need to send a copy of this low polygon mesh over to the sculpt room to begin working on it. Now, one thing that I tend to do when I'm working on this is to preserve copies of the model in its various stages inside this Poly Models palette, as we've been doing so far. So I'm going to change this one now as body 02 for secondary detail level, and I'm going to drag this version of it into my palette, and we can see there it's been given a name, body 02. So that preserves a copy just in case things go wrong as I'm progressing. Now, one of the things that we need to understand here as well and observe is our polygon cage in here and the number of polygons that we have. So we are looking, if we look down here, roughly at 4,700 just for the core. This doesn't include our other objects here. So we're roughly looking at 4,700 polygons for this mesh. So previously we've been working with our Catmull-Clark preview where we've used Shift-C to subdivide. We've made edits to our low polygon cage and then previewed them at that higher subdivision level to give us an understanding of the effects of those edits at a higher subdivision level. And that's an important concept to understand within the modeling workspace. We can work at a multi-resolution, but that's where we have to send this object over into the sculpt workspace. So let's first of all jump over to the sculpt workspace. I'm going to go to geometry and I'm going to take that polygon mesh using this option here, retop mesh to sculpt mesh. And when I do that, it brings that mesh in. It's using now a shader from the shader menu down here to represent the sculpt version of that 3D model in the modeling workspace. So you can see here that it's using this shader here. So our multi-resolution down here now can be used within the sculpt workspace. Now notice up here in the sculpt tree we have body 02, if you remember that's what I called my model, and we have the 4.7 thousand tries making up this object. So let's increase this resolution of this object now. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this multi-resolution tab and say add the lowest level from the retopo room. So when I click this, palette then opens up and gives me some additional options. Let's close this down because I don't need that at the moment. And what I can do now is I can add to the top level of resolution on here. Now notice what happens here as I do that. It's going to start increasing the resolution of our object. So with this added layer of resolution, you'll begin to notice that our model now has changed and it resembles the Catmull-Clark preview option that we were working with inside the modeling workspace. However, now I can add even more resolution, and notice that we've jumped up to 19,000 polygons here, and I can add another top level to that. Now we're at 75,000 polygons. But my model is maintaining most of that detail that we were looking at inside the modeling workspace. But I've got a lot more resolution to work with. Let's look at the wireframe of this sculpt object. So I'm going to hit W on the keyboard. And we can see here that we've got this triangulated mesh instead of that quadded mesh that we had before. Let's use the down res button now and see this adjust as it goes to a lower resolution. And then once again, we'll go back down to our base resolution. But now I'm able to move up and down my resolution, and any changes that I make to the higher resolution will be reflected at that lower resolution. So let's move to my top level, which was 3, and let's add another level of resolution. So now I'm at 302,000 triangles. Let's go out of our wireframe mode and look at our sculpt mesh. And we can begin sculpting at this resolution some of those tertiary details on our model. So within the Sculpt workspace, you may be wondering what happened to our original low poly model. If we hop back into the modeling workspace, you'll see it's still there. However, underneath you can see it's that Sculpt object sitting behind. Now if I go over to my opacity and reduce the opacity down, you can see those blue polygons now being removed, and the wireframe remains of our low poly object, and our sculpt is appearing underneath. Now the multi-resolution tab here is still active inside of the modeling room because we have this sculpt object active, and I can now, for example, down-res this sculpt object, and now I'm at the same resolution as the polygon object in the modeling workspace, and I can increase and get back to my higher subdivision level and preview what that looks like. The last thing we'll look at in this video is the Conform Retopo Mesh option that we can see here in the interface. Now I have a multi-resolution of 4 for this particular object, and if I use the Conform Retopo, you can see we're getting a preview outline of the wireframe inside the modeling workspace. So if I use, for example, in the Sculpt workspace, one of these sculpting tools like Move, and I take this area here and move this up, you can see that the preview low poly wireframe conforms to that shape that I created. Now if I jump back over to the modeling room, we can confirm this, because now we can see that low polygon mesh that we've been working on has now conformed to the underlying sculpt shape that we've just created in the sculpt room. So this is a very useful way for us now to shape our low polygon cage using the Sculpt workspace. In the next video, we'll continue to work on the Sculpt object and refine our modeled tertiary details. See you next time.